In the 13th century, Mongol armies swept across continents, striking fear into the world. No one believed they could be stopped. And yet, in the south, a small nation did the impossible, defeating the Mongols not once, but 3 times. At the heart of those victories stood Tran Hung Dao, a commander celebrated not only by his people, but among the greatest military leaders in all of history. His immortal legacy was built on 3 pillars: the courage to rise above hatred, the brilliance of military genius, and a legacy that endures through time. But before he rose as an eternal hero, he was once a boy. From an early age, Tran Hung Dao was brilliant in both scholarship and martial skills, mastering the classics, grasping strategy, and excelling in arms beyond his peers. Yet his life began under the shadow of vengeance. His father, Prince Tran Lu, had been forced to surrender his wife to the king. On his deathbed, he held his son's hand and whispered,
"You must claim the throne. Avenge this injustice."
That final command weighed heavily on the young Tran Hung Dao, shaping the burden he would carry into manhood. But as he grew, Tran Hung Dao realized personal revenge would only bring ruin to the realm. He chose the opposite path, to set aside family hatred and serve the nation. His marriage to Princess Tian Tan marked that decision. At home, he trained his sons into generals, turning his lineage into a stronghold of the Tran military. From ancestral vengeance, he became the nation's pillar. And when the Mongol armies swept into Dai Viet for the first time, his true trial began. In 1258, the Mongol army invaded Dai Viet and swiftly occupied Tunglong. The royal court withdrew, and the nation faced the threat of annihilation. Under the firm command of Grand Chancellor Tran Tuzhou, with the strategic support of the young Tran Hung Dao, the Vietnamese forces fought back relentlessly, while the Mongols, crippled by shortages of supplies, grew weaker with every step. After half a month, they were forced to withdraw from the land. From this campaign, Tran Hung Dao learned his first lasting lesson. To defend the realm, one must rally the people, seize the moment, and wield wisdom as the ultimate weapon. Peace was brief, for 2 decades later, the Mongols returned with over 500,000 troops, their overwhelming force striking terror across the south. At this moment of peril, Tran Hung Dao was no longer the young commander of years past, but the supreme commander of all land and naval forces. The court itself was divided between those urging peace and those calling for war, and amid these wavering voices he declared,
"If your majesty wishes to surrender, strike off my head first."
He enforced the strategy of scorched earth, preserving his forces before launching the decisive counterblow. At Hamtu, the southern line broke. At Chuangdong, the fleet burned, supplies lost, and Prince Tugan had to flee to the northern border. The victory of 1285 sealed Tran Hung Dao's role as the soul of resistance, the commander who turned intellect and national will into an unbeatable weapon. Yet the Mongols would not relent. In 1287, they returned with a massive army and fleet, determined to destroy Dai Viet once and for all. This time, Tran Hung Dao's genius guided the entire war effort, as he foresaw the enemy's collapse without supplies and ordered the destruction of General Zhang Wenhu's grain fleet. He chose the Bach Dang River as the killing ground, turning nature itself into a weapon. Thousands of sharpened stakes were planted beneath the waters, hidden by the tide. As the Mongol fleet advanced, the tide fell. Chaos erupted as ships were impaled, and Vietnamese forces struck from all sides. Admiral Omar was captured alive, as Prince Toban once again fled in panic. This was the pinnacle of Tran Hung Dao's command, a military masterpiece before which the world bowed, carving his name into the chronicles and ensuring his legacy would live immortal. Tran Hung Dao left behind the essentials of military strategy and the secret teachings of Von Keep, manuals of war far ahead of their time. Most enduring was his proclamation to the army, echoing with heartfelt words,
"I often forget to eat, awake at midnight, my heart cut with sorrow, my tears falling."
Even as illness consumed him, he reminded Emperor Tran Hung Dao, rely on the people, put humanity at the core. His final breath was bound to the words people and nation. To the Vietnamese, he was venerated as Saint Tran, from private grief transformed into national duty, from victories that shook the world to teachings that continue to guide generations, all merged into an eternal radiance. He stands as timeless proof of a universal truth. The strength of a nation lies not only in its armies, but in its wisdom, its righteousness, and its unity.
Why the West barely knows about Tran Hung Dao. If you open a Western history book about the medieval era, you'll see plenty about Rome, Greece, or moving east, China, India, and Japan. But have you ever seen the name Dai Viet appear there? Seldom. First, Dai Viet was not an international recording hub in the medieval world. Unlike Rome, which had Latin or China with classical Chinese, languages that served as the international diplomatic tongues of their time, Vietnamese had no such medium to project their own voice abroad. Most historical sources about Tran Hung Dao are found in the complete annals of Dai Viet or the Yuan history, and very few have been translated into English. As a result, while Western historians know all about the Mongols' defeat in Japan by the famous kamikaze, or in Egypt at the Battle of Ain Jalut, they might not know that Dai Viet was also one of the few nations on earth to defeat the Mongol Empire 3 times. Second, Vietnam lay outside the geographical consciousness zone of medieval Europe. To European mapmakers of that era, Asia meant just 4 familiar names: China, India, Japan, and Persia. Other nations, including Dai Viet, were loosely lumped into an indistinct mass called Indochina, a hazy strip wedged between greater civilizations. And when you fall outside the mental map of the recorders, even the greatest victories can be buried under the towering shadows of China and the Mongols. Finally, there's a modern political academic reason. In the 20th century, the global system of historiography was largely shaped by the West. Vietnamese, still recovering from modern wars, had neither the resources nor the platforms to share their medieval narratives with the world. So international scholars grew familiar with the Vietnam War, but not with Vietnam's medieval wars. In other words, Tran Hung Dao was overshadowed not by failure, but by his nation's more recent history.
First, Tran Hung Dao was simply too complete a man to be dramatized. He never lost, never betrayed, never fell into corruption, and left behind no scandal or shadow. He sought no throne, built no faction, and left power as peacefully as he had wielded it. In the language of storytelling, that kind of perfection is almost anti-dramatic. He stands less like a character in a play and more like a saint, flawless, luminous, untouchable. In Vietnamese culture, Tran Hung Dao is not merely a hero. He is honored as a saint by his people. In Vietnam, people have built temples in his honor and continue to worship him as a guardian spirit. This sacred status elevates him into the realm of divinity, but it also removes him from the realm of storytelling. Any attempt to portray him as human with inner struggles can easily be seen as disrespectful. Thus, his story remains framed within a halo, brilliant but unreachable. The truth is, the world remembers tragedies, not perfections. From Joan of Arc to Caesar, Napoleon to Yi Sun Sin, their greatness is intertwined with suffering, downfall, and redemption. Their stories move us because they remind us of our own fragility. Tran Hung Dao stands apart. He does not ask for sympathy, only respect. He doesn't make people weep for him, he makes them look up to him. And that, perhaps, is why he remains a historical giant, yet a narrative enigma in the modern world. There are things about Tran Hung Dao that the world rarely hears, but once you do, you'll realize his greatness. First, his strategic thinking was centuries ahead of its time. Long before Karl von Clausewitz wrote about total war or the People's War, Tran Hung Dao had already mobilized an entire nation, peasants, nobles, monks, and soldiers, into a unified defense system. In a sense, he applied the concept of comprehensive national warfare more than 500 years before Europe even coined the term. Secondly, his moral philosophy of warfare was just as profound. He lived by the principle of loyalty and righteousness in harmony, putting his country above all personal or dynastic grievances. Remember, his father had every reason to hate the royal family, yet he chose loyalty to the nation over vengeance, a rare ethical stance in Asian history, where family honor often outweighed state duty. Third, his military record was unmatched on a continental scale. He was the commander in history to defeat the Mongol Empire more than once. Persia, Russia, China, and Japan all faced the same empire, yet each either fell or barely survived a single encounter. Tran Hung Dao, commanding a small kingdom army, achieved victory against the Mongols 3 times. Fourth, he mastered both land and naval warfare. At a time when most generals specialized in one domain, he led both the army and the navy, culminating in the legendary Battle of Bach Dang, a masterpiece of coordination between the use of river tides, ambush strategy, and mastering the terrain. A general excellently mastering both land and naval strategy is something you rarely see, even in modern military history. Finally, his long-term vision went beyond victory. After the war, he didn't seek conquest or expansion. Instead, he focused on rebuilding the nation, reconciling internal factions, and maintaining regional balance, understanding that true greatness lies not in domination, but in preservation. Now compare with how history remembers other heroes. Let's talk about Admiral Yi Sun-sin of Korea, a brilliant commander, no doubt. But the reason his name echoes worldwide today is that modern Korea invested heavily in films, literature, and global storytelling. Tran Hung Dao, on the other hand, still waits for the day his story is told in the language of globalization, and that day is only just beginning, as Vietnam learns to tell its own past with the voice the world can hear.